It was supposed to be just another Saturday morning for Jake Turner, a part-time reseller and full-time treasure hunter. Like many others in the world of abandoned storage auctions, Jake had grown used to digging through dust-covered boxes and long-forgotten belongings in search of hidden gems, antiques, collectibles, or anything he could flip for a decent profit. He never imagined that this particular storage unit, one with a modest bid of $120, would be the one to make headlines or haunt his memory forever. The unit had been untouched for over a decade, tucked away in a quiet part of town, with cobwebs hanging like curtains at the entrance. The door groaned as it rolled up, revealing a chaotic mess of old furniture, stacked cardboard boxes, and a few rusted tools. The air was thick with the stale scent of time. Jake took a deep breath and stepped inside, ready to do what he always did: dig, sort, and maybe strike gold. He had no clue that buried beneath the layers of ordinary was something that would stop him cold. Literally. It wasn't long before he noticed the freezer. A large, vintage-style chest freezer pushed awkwardly against the back wall. Unlike the rest of the dusty, forgotten contents, the freezer seemed odd. It was plugged in, humming softly, still working after all these years. That alone was strange. Most storage units didn't have working outlets, let alone an appliance still running after more than 10 years. Jake felt a chill, not from the cold, but from something else. A feeling he couldn't quite explain. Still, curiosity got the better of him. After all, you never know what people hide away. Some keep cash. Others, rare memorabilia. The best stories often begin with the unexpected. He wiped away the grime from the freezer lid and hesitated. Something about it felt off. It wasn't locked, but the handle was sticky, as if it hadn't been opened in years. He glanced around, half expecting someone to walk in and stop him. But he was alone. Completely alone in that dark, narrow unit, with nothing but silence and the low buzz of the freezer. He pulled the lid open and froze. Whatever Jake had expected to find inside, it wasn't this. The cold mist rising from the freezer curled into the air like fingers reaching out, but it wasn't the fog that stole his breath, it was what lay beneath it. His mind struggled to process the scene in front of him, flickering between disbelief and dread. He stepped back, hand trembling, heart pounding loud enough to drown out the quiet hum of the freezer motor. He couldn't tell exactly what it was at first. The contents were partially covered, but one thing was clear: it wasn't food. And it definitely wasn't something meant to be stored. There was a heavy, eerie stillness in the air now, as if the temperature around him had dropped several degrees the moment the lid lifted. Jake stood motionless, unsure if he should take a second look or slam the lid shut and walk away. His gut screamed at him to run, but his feet remained rooted in place. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, hands slick with sweat. He took a photo, just one, before quickly shutting the freezer. The image burned into his eyes was enough. But more than the shock, more than the chill, it was the sense of presence that got to him. He no longer felt alone. There was something about that unit, about that freezer, that made him feel watched. Like he'd stumbled into a secret that someone never wanted uncovered. Jake stepped outside, blinking against the sunlight like he hadn't seen it in years. His breathing was shallow, his thoughts spinning. What had he just found? What was in that freezer? His fingers hovered over the screen of his phone, debating whether to call the police right away or take another look. Maybe he was overreacting. Maybe it was something explainable. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. And this is where the story truly begins. Jake Turner's discovery didn't just rattle him, it shook the whole town. When authorities arrived and opened the unit, they found more than just the contents of a forgotten life. They found questions. Layers of mystery that went beyond a freezer in a storage locker. Questions about who rented that unit, why it had stayed locked up for so long, and most importantly, what exactly was being preserved inside. Rumors started spreading like wildfire. Some said it was an animal, others whispered of something far more sinister. But the truth? The truth was something no one saw coming. The investigation revealed odd inconsistencies, missing records, a name that didn't match any known resident, and a payment trail that vanished years before the unit was even listed as abandoned. It was as if someone had gone to great lengths to hide whatever secret that freezer held. For Jake, the discovery marked the end of his casual storage hunting days. But he couldn't let it go. He found himself replaying the moment over and over again. What if he hadn't opened that lid? What if he'd walked away? What if what he saw wasn't even the whole story? Friends and family tried to console him, tried to tell him he'd done the right thing. But that didn't stop the nightmares. The image from the freezer haunted him, and though he had handed the phone over to investigators, he knew what he'd seen. He could still see it, frozen in time. And yet, even with the police involved, even after days of investigation, the answers remained just out of reach. What Jake found that day wasn't just chilling in the literal sense. It was the key to a story bigger than he imagined. A story that stretched years into the past, tangled in shadows and silence. A story that someone clearly went to great lengths to bury. But one man's curiosity cracked it open. And now, what lies inside that freezer might just unearth a chain of events no one was ready for. Because the deeper you dig into forgotten places, the more likely you are to uncover things that were never meant to be found. And some secrets, once thought out, refused to stay buried. Jake didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the freezer again. White, frosted over, humming low like it had a heartbeat of its own. He hadn't told anyone the full details of what he saw, not even the officers who questioned him after he called it in. Partly because he wasn't sure how to describe it, and partly because saying it out loud would make it real. The only thing he was sure of was that nothing about what he found in that storage unit felt normal. The next morning, Jake sat at his kitchen table, staring at the cup of coffee he hadn't touched. His phone buzzed every few minutes. News alerts, missed calls, texts from people who somehow already heard about what happened. Word had gotten out fast, even though officials hadn't released anything to the public yet. It's a small town, and when something weird happens, people talk. The story was already turning into a rumor mill. Jake read the headlines with growing anxiety. Man discovers mystery freezer in abandoned unit. Police investigating chilling find in storage facility. Freezer discovery shocks local resident. Investigation ongoing. None of them mentioned what was really inside. None of them knew. And Jake could tell the truth wasn't going to come out easily. Later that afternoon, Detective Lisa Morin showed up at his door. She was in her 40s, serious eyes, and calm in a way that made Jake feel even more nervous. She introduced herself, flashed her badge, and asked if she could come in and talk. He nodded and led her into the living room, where they both sat quietly for a moment. "I know you've already spoken to the officers on scene," she said, "but I'd like to ask you a few more questions, just to get a better understanding." Jake nodded. "Yeah, sure. I'll try." She leaned forward. "You said you opened the freezer, and you saw something. What exactly did you see, Jake?" He hesitated. His mouth went dry. He thought about the shape, the way it was covered just enough to keep him guessing, but clear enough to chill him to the core. It looked like something wrapped up. Large. Not like furniture or equipment. More like, I don't know. It didn't look right. She didn't press him, just nodded slowly, scribbling something down in her notebook. "We've sent it out for forensic analysis. Could take a while. But the contents are definitely unusual. There are no records tied to the storage unit since 2012. That's 13 years without a single missed payment. And the owner's name on the lease? Fake. Completely fabricated." Jake frowned. "So, whoever rented it kept paying for it for years, just to hide that freezer." "That's what it looks like," she said. "It's not uncommon in cases where someone's trying to make something disappear without literally disposing of it. A locked, paid-for storage unit is almost invisible if you play it right." Jake leaned back. "But why keep it plugged in?" Lisa gave him a look. "That's what we're trying to figure out." After she left, Jake couldn't stop thinking about it. Who rents a unit, hides a freezer inside, and pays for it silently for over a decade? It wasn't the kind of mistake people made. It was deliberate and expensive. Jake felt the weight of it now, not just what he had seen, but what it might mean. He'd stumbled into something someone had worked very hard to keep hidden, and now he was part of it. As the week went on, more pieces started to surface, though nothing made the mystery any clearer. The storage facility owner, an older man named Greg, told reporters that the unit had been under contract for years, always paid through auto transfer. He never saw who rented it. Said they signed the lease in person once, then vanished. No forwarding address. No complaints. Just money coming in like clockwork. Until 6 months ago, when the payment stopped, and the unit eventually went up for auction. Greg mentioned one odd detail, though. Years ago, He remembered hearing a complaint from a customer whose unit was right next to the one Jake had opened. They said they smelled something weird, like chemicals. But when Greg checked it out, he found nothing and let it go. No one brought it up again. That was back in 2016. Jake started digging too. Not because he wanted to be involved, but because he couldn't ignore it. He went online, searched through old news articles, public records, anything that might explain who had access to that unit. But there was nothing. The name used to rent it, Martin Graves, didn't match any license, tax form, or known person in the state. It was like chasing a ghost with a frozen footprint. One night, Jake visited the storage facility again. He wasn't supposed to be there, but the gate was open, and curiosity was louder than reason. The unit had police tape around it now, sealed shut until the investigation wrapped up. He stood there, hands in his pockets, staring at the cold steel door that had once rolled up and revealed a nightmare. He wasn't alone for long. A voice startled him from behind. "You're the one who found it, huh?" Jake turned to see a man in his 60s, wiry build, weathered face. He wore a cap pulled low and a look that said he'd seen too much. "Name's Alan. Used to rent the unit across from this one. Back in the day." Jake hesitated. "Did you ever notice anything weird?" Alan's eyes shifted. "More than once. Late at night, sometimes I'd hear humming like machinery. And there was this one time I saw a guy walking real late, back when the unit was still locked up. Tall, wearing gloves. Moved fast, like he didn't want anyone seeing him. I didn't think much of it. Figured it was none of my business. But now," Jake leaned in. "What do you mean?" Alan lowered his voice. "Whatever was in that freezer, it wasn't new. I think it was there for a long time. And I think more than one person knew about it." That thought sent a chill down Jake's spine. What if this wasn't just a case of a hidden secret, but part of something bigger? Something ongoing? Alan glanced around before walking away. "Watch yourself, kid. People don't go to this much trouble unless they've got something to lose." Jake stood in the dark, heart racing, the man's warning echoing in his head. He knew now he hadn't just found a mystery, he'd opened a door that someone had sealed shut for a reason. And whatever was behind it wasn't done with him yet. The night air felt heavier as he got into his car and drove off. But even as the facility disappeared in his rearview mirror, the feeling stayed with him, like a shadow he couldn't shake. And somewhere, whoever had rented that unit might already know he'd seen too much. Jake didn't tell anyone about the conversation with Alan. Not the police, not his friends, not even his sister Amy, who had been calling more often since the news broke. He didn't want to worry her, and besides, he wasn't even sure what Alan meant. But the way he said it, that more than one person knew, kept looping in Jake's head. And if that was true, who else had been watching? Who else had a stake in keeping that freezer sealed and forgotten? The next few days passed in a blur. News vans camped outside the storage facility. Reporters asked questions no one had answers to. Online forums were full of wild theories. Some said Jake had uncovered evidence from an old cold case. Others believed it was something far more sinister, like the leftovers of a secret experiment or a long-forgotten crime. Everyone seemed to have a theory, but no one had facts. The authorities kept things quiet, which only added fuel to the rumors. Detective Lisa Moran called Jake back in for a second interview. This time, she wasn't alone. A federal agent, who introduced himself as Agent Roland, sat beside her, expression unreadable. They weren't just investigating a forgotten freezer anymore. Something bigger had landed on their desks, and now Jake was right in the middle of it. "We need you to go over every detail again," Agent Roland said, calm but firm. "Anything you saw, anything you heard, even what you felt. No detail is too small." Jake did his best to explain it all again. The unit, the plugged-in freezer, the strange smell, the shape under the frost, the heavy feeling in the air. But every word that came out of his mouth made him feel like he was reliving it. And no matter how many times he told the story, it never got easier. When he was done, Lisa asked, "Have you had anyone reach out to you since the story broke? Anyone unusual?" Jake shook his head. "Just people online. Random messages. Most of it's junk." She didn't press further, but he noticed the look between her and Roland. Something was going on, and they weren't ready to share it yet. Meanwhile, Jake's world outside the investigation had started to crumble. His part-time job at the local hardware store had quietly asked him to take a break. Not because he did anything wrong, but because customers wouldn't stop asking questions, and it was becoming a distraction. Jake understood. Still, it felt like the mystery was following him everywhere. Even his apartment didn't feel like his anymore. He kept the blinds shut, double-checked the locks, and jumped every time the phone rang. More than once, he caught himself looking over his shoulder, sure someone was watching him. Whether it was paranoia or something real, he couldn't tell anymore. The freezer wasn't just a story. It was becoming his whole life. One night, Jake received an anonymous email. No subject, no message body, just one photo attachment. He opened it, and his stomach dropped. It was the same storage unit, but not the one from now. It was older, the walls cleaner, the lighting different. And in the photo was the freezer, just barely visible in the background. Standing next to it was a man. Tall, thin, wearing a dark coat, face blurred. The timestamp said 2013. Jake's hand shook as he stared at the screen. Who sent this? And more importantly, how did they get it? Was this a warning? Or a clue? He forwarded the image to Detective Moran but got no reply that night. Alone and anxious, he called Amy. She picked up on the second ring. Hey, she said. You okay? No, Jake admitted. Something's going on. I think someone's trying to scare me. He told her about the email, about the man in the photo, about Alan's warning. Amy was silent for a while, then said, Jake, maybe you should stay with me for a while. Just until this blows over. Jake wanted to. But something told him walking away wasn't the answer. Not yet. The next morning, he drove to the library to dig through newspaper archives. He was looking for anything, missing person reports, strange incidents, abandoned properties, anything that could be linked to the name on the lease, Martin Graves. Nothing came up. But one article did catch his eye. It was a story from 2011 about a man named Peter Kincaid, who had been reported missing by his wife. He was last seen near the industrial area of town, the same area where the storage facility was located. The article mentioned he'd been working on a private contract for a refrigeration company. Jake stared at the photo in the article. The resemblance was vague, but something about the man's posture looked familiar. He printed the article and took it to Lisa the next day. She looked it over, expression tightening. We've seen this. Kincaid was never found, but we're not ruling anything out. Jake leaned forward. Could he be the one in the photo? From the email? Lisa didn't answer directly. We're trying to trace where the photo came from. No metadata, no source. Whoever sent it wanted us to see it, but not know who they are. Jake left the station with more questions than answers. He wasn't sleeping well, and the weight of the whole thing was starting to wear him down. The more he dug, the more tangled everything became. There were dead ends, shadowy figures, and secrets hidden in plain sight. And the worst part? He still didn't know what was actually inside that freezer. No official report had been released. All he had was the glimpse he got that first day, and the silence that followed. Then, something unexpected happened. Jake got a visit from a woman named Evelyn. She was in her late 30s, with sharp eyes and a careful voice. She introduced herself as Peter Kincaid's niece. I saw your name in the news, she said. I think what you found might be connected to my uncle. I haven't talked to the police yet. I wanted to come to you first. Jake invited her inside, and they talked for hours. Evelyn explained that her Uncle Peter had been acting strange before he vanished. He kept telling family members he was working on something important and confidential. Then one day, he stopped calling. Disappeared. His wife filed a report, but nothing ever came of it. He was working for a company called Cryostar Systems, she said. They specialized in industrial freezers and temperature-controlled storage. I remember because he told us once, jokingly, that his job was all about keeping secrets on ice. Jake blinked. Cryostar? I've never heard of it. It folded years ago. Quietly. No bankruptcy. Just gone. They exchanged contact information, and Evelyn promised to keep him updated. As she left, Jake realized something had shifted. He wasn't the only one searching now. Someone else had skin in the game. Someone who also wanted answers. Maybe together, they could find them. But just when he thought things couldn't get weirder, he got another message. This time, a voicemail. No caller ID. The voice on the other end was deep, muffled. You need to stop digging. Some things are left buried for a reason. The message ended with a click. Jake stared at his phone, heart pounding. There was no doubt now someone was watching him. The freezer wasn't just a mistake uncovered. It was a doorway into a story someone desperately wanted to keep closed. But it was too late. He had opened it, and the cold truth was starting to seep out. Jake barely slept after the voicemail. He kept replaying the distorted voice in his head, each word echoing louder than before. Some things are left buried for a reason. It wasn't just a warning. It felt like a threat. Whoever was behind it knew exactly who Jake was, and they clearly didn't want him looking deeper. But the strange part was how calm the voice sounded. It wasn't panicked or angry. It was cold, measured, like this wasn't the first time they'd done something like this. He debated going to the police with the message, but something held him back. A gut feeling that told him the people who sent it were the kind who could make things disappear, including evidence. Jake wasn't sure who to trust anymore. Even the police were keeping details from him. Every time he asked about the results of the freezer's forensic analysis, Lisa Moran gave him the same answer. They were still waiting. But it had been weeks. And Jake couldn't shake the feeling that the longer it dragged on, the more likely someone was trying to bury the truth all over again. Evelyn reached out 2 days later. She'd been doing her own research, diving into her uncle's past, his coworkers, and especially Cryostar systems. "You were right," she told Jake. "There's something off about that company. I found 2 other employees who also disappeared around the same time Peter did, both listed as missing under unusual circumstances. No follow-ups. No investigations. Just gone." Jake met her at a quiet diner off the highway. They sat in the far booth, their voices low, both looking over their shoulders more than once. Evelyn pulled out an old manila folder, filled with notes, clippings, and 2 old ID badges. One of the badges belonged to Peter. The other was someone named Marcus Dell, one of the other missing Cryostar employees. "Here's the kicker," Evelyn said. "Marcus lived 2 blocks away from the original storage facility location Cryostar rented before they closed down." "The unit you found?" "It's just a few miles from there." Jake felt a pit forming in his stomach. "You think that freezer might have come from their facility?" "I don't think," she said. "I know. I found old blueprints from Cryostar's warehouse. One of the listed assets was a walk-in prototype freezer, industrial size, used for long-term containment. Guess what model it was?" "The exact one you found." Jake stared at her. Why would anyone need to hide a prototype in a public storage unit? Evelyn looked back at him, serious. Because whatever was inside it wasn't meant to be found. They left the diner and drove out to the old Cryostar facility. The building had been abandoned for years, windows boarded, signs torn down, fences rusting. But the moment they stepped out of the car, Jake felt it. That same eerie pressure in the air. A silence that felt too heavy. The front gate had a chain and padlock, but someone had clearly broken it before them. The chain hung loose. The door was slightly ajar. Jake and Evelyn exchanged glances, then stepped inside. The interior was dark, lit only by the afternoon light leaking through cracks and broken glass. They passed empty offices, dusty machinery, and piles of discarded equipment. And then they found it, an underground access door near the back loading area. A stairwell led down into the darkness. The air grew colder as they descended. What they found below changed everything. The basement level was still intact. Old lights flickered weakly overhead. Rows of sealed crates lined the walls. And on the far end of the room, behind a half-collapsed wall, stood another freezer, identical to the one Jake had opened in the storage unit. Jake froze. This one's still locked. Evelyn approached it slowly. "There's more," she whispered, pointing to a wall of folders and binders stacked nearby. Most were water-damaged, but a few were legible. They showed internal Cryostar memos, emails, technical reports. Words like biostasis protocol, human testing, and containment breach were scrawled across the pages. Jake's breath caught. This wasn't just a company testing cooling systems. "No," Evelyn said, her face pale. "They were experimenting on people." The moment those words left her mouth, they heard it. A sound upstairs. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. They weren't alone. Jake motioned to turn off the flashlight. They ducked behind a crate, hearts pounding in sync. Someone was in the building. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped right above them. A beam of light swept across the walls. Jake whispered, "Who would still be watching this place?" Evelyn shook her head, eyes wide. Then the sound of the door creaking open echoed down the stairwell. Someone was coming down. Jake clutched a rusted piece of metal, his only defense. He and Evelyn waited, crouched low, trying not to breathe. The figure stepped into view, tall, dressed in black, a flashlight in one hand, and something metallic in the other. Jake couldn't see the face, but the silhouette was familiar. Too familiar. It matched the man in the photo from the anonymous email. The one standing next to the original freezer. Evelyn mouthed, "That's him." The man moved slowly through the basement, scanning shelves and boxes like he was searching for something. He paused near the second freezer, then turned directly toward the crate Jake and Evelyn were hiding behind. He took a step closer, then another. Jake felt the grip on his makeshift weapon tighten. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from upstairs, something falling over. The man flinched and turned sharply, aiming his flashlight toward the sound. Without hesitation, he bolted up the stairs, disappearing from sight. Jake didn't wait. "We need to move. Now." They raced out of the basement, grabbing the folders and files they could carry, and fled through the same broken gate they entered from. As they drove away, Evelyn kept looking back, as if expecting the man to follow. But no one did. Back at Jake's apartment, they spread the papers out on the table. The documents were incomplete, but enough of the language was clear. Cryostar had been testing extreme cold conditions on living subjects, biological preservation, as they called it. The goal wasn't just freezing things for storage, it was halting cellular activity without killing the body. They weren't trying to preserve food. They were trying to preserve people. Experiments, it seemed, that had gone far off the rails. Evelyn found one report with names redacted, but the date on it matched the week Peter went missing. "This is it," she said. "He was part of this. Maybe even one of the subjects. Or maybe he tried to stop it." Jake couldn't wrap his head around it. How could something this big happen without anyone knowing? How did a company get away with freezing people, possibly alive, and hiding the evidence in storage units? A knock on the door made them both jump. Jake peered through the peephole. No one was there. He opened the door cautiously, heart in his throat. On the ground lay a small box. No label. No return address. He brought it inside and opened it slowly. Inside was a flash drive and a note. "You've seen enough. But not everything. If you want answers, come alone. 10 p.m. Pier 14. No police." Jake read the note twice, then looked at Evelyn. She already knew what he was thinking. "This could be a trap," she said. "Or it could be the only way to finish this," he replied. The room fell silent. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. Inside, the air grew colder. Like the past was about to thaw out and reveal the darkest secret of all. Jake stared at the note in his hand, heart hammering against his chest. The words felt like a dare. "You've seen enough. But not everything." He didn't say anything for a moment, just held the flash drive between his fingers like it was radioactive. Evelyn stood beside him, scanning his face for a reaction. Neither of them wanted to speak first, because they both knew what this meant. Someone was watching, someone who had been pulling strings from the shadows since day one. And now, for some reason, they wanted to talk. Jake plugged the flash drive into his laptop. The screen flickered for a second before a single video file popped up. He clicked it. Grainy footage began to play, an overhead security camera inside what looked like an underground lab. The angle showed several metallic chambers, computers blinking in the background, and two men standing over what appeared to be a sealed cryogenic tank. The timestamp in the corner read, August 17th, 2011. Jake leaned in, jaw tightening. That's the year Peter disappeared. They watched as the two men argued silently. There was no audio, but the body language said enough. One of them pointed angrily at the tank. The other gestured toward a clipboard, then back to the cameras. It ended with one of them storming out, the other standing still for several seconds before turning directly toward the camera. Jake hit pause. "That's him," he said quietly. "The guy from the freezer photo. The one who was in the basement at Cryostar." Evelyn nodded slowly. "He's been involved since the beginning." Jake ran his hand through his hair. If they recorded this, what else did they record? They didn't have time to find out. The note had given them a deadline, 10 p.m., Pier 14. Jake checked the time. It was almost 9. He looked at Evelyn, conflicted. I know what you said, that it could be a trap. And you're probably right. But if I don't go, we might never get the full truth. Evelyn didn't argue. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small recording device. Take this. Record everything. No matter what happens. Jake slipped it into his coat pocket. You're not coming? If I show up with you, they might spook, she said. But I'll be nearby, watching. By the time Jake reached Pier 14, the sky was a deep charcoal. Fog clung to the edge of the dock like a curtain, and the water slapped gently against the wooden posts. The pier was empty. No boats. No lights. Just the steady creak of old wood beneath his feet as he walked. A figure emerged from the mist. Jake stopped, hands in his pockets, forcing himself to appear calm. The man stepped into view. It was the same man from the CryoStar footage. Tall, cold eyes, clean-shaven face lined with age and exhaustion. He didn't introduce himself. You opened the wrong door, the man said flatly. Jake kept his voice steady. Then help me open the right one. The man studied him for a moment. This isn't about one freezer. It never was. That was just the piece that broke the seal. Then what is it about? Control, the man replied. And consequences. Jake frowned. Consequences for what? For cheating nature, the man said. CryoStar's real project wasn't about preservation. It was about denial. They weren't trying to freeze people to save them. They were trying to buy time for the wrong people. People with money. Power. The goal was to perfect stasis long enough to outlive their own failures. Jake's pulse quickened. You're saying they froze themselves? Not all, the man said. Just enough. The rest of us? We were experiments. Disposable ones. Jake's mind reeled. Peter Kincaid. Was he one of them? He was the one who tried to stop it, the man said. He knew what was happening. He thought he could leak the truth, expose the tests, save the ones still locked inside. What happened to him? The man hesitated, then said he paid the price. So did the others. But someone made sure at least one chamber was moved. Hidden. The one you found. Jake took a step forward. Why leave it there? Why let it be discovered? I didn't, the man said. But someone did. And now the wrong people know it's been exposed. A sudden noise cut through the air behind them, footsteps. Fast. Heavy. Jake turned to see two men in dark clothes rushing from the shadows, their faces obscured. The older man pushed Jake hard. Run. Jake stumbled but didn't hesitate. He bolted across the pier as a struggle broke out behind him. Yells. A thud. The sound of something falling into the water. He didn't look back. Evelyn's car was parked 2 blocks away. She saw him running and threw the door open. What happened? They found him. He tried to warn me, but someone else was watching. Jake couldn't breathe. They're trying to erase everything. Back at the apartment, they sat in silence, trying to make sense of it all. Jake played the audio recording. Most of it was clear, but the final moments, the struggle, were full of noise. No way to tell if the man survived. No way to know who the attackers were. Then, Evelyn's phone buzzed. An anonymous message. Just 3 words. You're next. Stop. Jake stared at the screen. This is bigger than just us now. Evelyn nodded. Which means we need to go bigger too. The next morning, they drove out of town. Evelyn had contacts, a journalist she trusted in a nearby city, someone known for exposing hidden truths. They agreed to meet in a neutral location, far from the chaos. If they couldn't rely on the police, maybe they could rely on the press. But on the way, Jake's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. A woman's voice spoke, soft but urgent. You don't know me, but I was part of CryoStar, too. I'm the one who sent the photo. In the video, you were never supposed to find the unit. They only left it there because they thought no one would dare open it. Jake's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Why did you help us? Because I helped build the system that hurt them, she said. I thought we were building something that would save lives. But I was wrong. I didn't realize until it was too late. What do they want now? To start over, she said. And make sure no one ever finds out what we did. If you go to the media, they'll come for you. Like they came for Peter. Like they came for the others. Jake's voice was low. Then tell me how to stop them. There was silence on the line. Then, there's one more unit. One no one knows about but me. If you want the truth, that's where you'll find it. She gave him coordinates. Then hung up. Jake pulled the car over and looked at Evelyn. There's another one. One that might explain everything. Do we trust her? No, Jake said. But we have to try. They drove for hours, deep into the countryside, where cell service dropped and the roads turned to gravel. The location was tucked behind an old barn, surrounded by overgrown weeds and rusted equipment. It looked like nothing. Abandoned. Forgotten. But behind the barn was a shed. And inside that shed, another freezer. Larger, newer, and sealed shut with an industrial lock. Jake stepped forward, heart pounding. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The air around the shed was thick and silent, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Jake stepped toward the large industrial freezer, its white surface weathered and stained with years of dust and rust. A padlock hung from the latch, solid and cold. Evelyn stood behind him, eyes locked on the metal box like it might move on its own. Jake bent down and examined the lock. "We're not breaking this open without tools," he said. Evelyn pulled a small crowbar from her bag. "Then let's not waste time." It took them 15 minutes of struggling, every creak of metal echoing like thunder in the quiet countryside. But finally, the lock snapped. Jake stepped back, breathing hard. Evelyn reached for the handle, then hesitated. "You sure?" she asked. "No," Jake said honestly. "But we came this far." Together, they lifted the lid. Cold air rushed out, curling like smoke into the warm barn. The inside was darker than expected, lined with a thick frost. And in the center, wrapped in plastic and surrounded by ice packs and thick insulation, was a sealed chamber, smaller than the one in the storage unit but just as ominous. Jake leaned in and wiped away the frost covering a small control panel. The screen flickered to life, dim but still functional. A soft beep followed, then a readout appeared. One word blinked slowly, "Stasis active." Evelyn gasped. "Someone's still in there." Jake's throat tightened. "This one's not just a shell. It's running." He tapped through the menu. No name. No ID. Just a code. Subject 47. Evelyn scrambled to the paperwork in her bag, comparing it with the CryoStar files they'd taken from the basement. She found it. "Subject 47. That's Peter," she whispered. Jake blinked. "Are you sure?" She held out the sheet. The subject number matched the notes tied to Peter's last known location in the internal report he'd written days before his disappearance. According to the notes, Peter had volunteered, believing he was testing short-term cryosleep. But the program had gone dark before he could be retrieved. Evelyn stared at the chamber, her voice shaking. "They froze him alive, then shut the whole operation down." Jake looked at the panel again. The timer showed the system had been active for over 13 years. 13 years sealed in a box, forgotten by everyone except the people who wanted him to stay that way. "We have to open it," Evelyn said. Jake hesitated. "We don't know what'll happen. If the system's been keeping him stable this long, cutting power could, then we do it the right way," she said. "We find a medical team, someone who can help. We don't make the same mistake CryoStar made." Before they could decide, headlights lit the wall of the barn behind them. Jake froze. "We've got company." They ducked low, watching through the cracks in the wood as two black SUVs pulled up. Several figures in dark suits stepped out, moving with precision. One of them stayed by the car. Another carried a black case. And in the center, walking calmly, was the same man from the pier, the one who had tried to warn Jake. The man who'd vanished into the water. He was alive. Jake whispered. "How is he still standing?" The man stepped into the barn, flashlight sweeping across the room until it landed on them. "It's time to let it go," he said quietly. Jake stood slowly. "You lied. You said you were trying to stop them." "I was," the man replied. "But stopping them didn't mean exposing everything. There are things the world isn't ready for. Things it never should have touched. And this," he nodded toward the chamber, "this is one of them." Evelyn stepped forward, defiant. "That's my uncle in there. You froze him and left him to rot." "He volunteered," the man said. "He believed in the science. But the moment he realized who the science was for, he wanted out. So we gave him a way out. Stasis was supposed to protect him. He wasn't meant to be part of this mess." Jake pointed at the freezer. "So what now? You just take him and disappear again?" "No," the man said. "We destroy it. In the trail. If you let this story out, it will spiral. Every part of it, CryoStar, the subjects, the tech, it'll be weaponized. You think the world will mourn Peter Kincaid?" No. They'll try to replicate him. Evelyn shook her head. You don't get to decide that anymore. She lunged toward the chamber, flipping the emergency release lever before anyone could stop her. The machine hissed loudly. Lights blinked red. The control panel flashed warnings as the temperature slowly began to rise. The man shouted something, but Jake didn't hear. Everything became noise. The hum of machinery, the shouting, the rising tension as the chamber unlocked. Then, a click. The hatch lifted open. Steam poured out in thick waves. Inside, a figure lay motionless, skin pale, chest barely rising. Evelyn rushed forward, hand trembling as she reached inside. He's alive, she whispered. He's breathing. The men from the SUV stepped forward, but Jake blocked them. You're not taking him. The leader looked at them both. Then something unexpected happened. He stepped back. You've already lit the fuse, he said. Now you deal with the fire. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the barn, his team following. Within minutes, the vehicles vanished down the road, leaving only dust behind. Evelyn crouched beside the chamber, wrapping a blanket around her uncle's fragile body. We need help, she said. Jake nodded. He pulled out his phone and called the journalist they'd been heading toward. They wouldn't run anymore. They were going to tell the story. All of it. By morning, Peter Kincaid was under medical care in a private facility outside the city. Doctors said it was a miracle. His body was weak, but he was alive. His memory, however, was hazy. Years inside the stasis chamber had taken their toll. But every day, more of him returned. Evelyn stayed by his side. Jake helped gather the files, the recordings, and every piece of evidence they'd uncovered. Within days, the story went public. National media outlets picked it up. Cryostar's name returned, this time, not as a scientific innovator, but as a shadowy project gone too far. But just when things seemed to settle, Jake received one final message. A small envelope. No name. No return address. Inside was a single photo. It showed a different chamber. One they hadn't seen. One not listed in the Cryostar documents. Below it, handwritten in clean black ink, were just 3 words. Subject 01. Active. Jake stared at it, pulse rising. Somewhere out there, another unit was still running. Another person frozen. Another secret buried. The truth had come out, but not all of it. Jake looked up at the night sky, cold wind brushing against his face. The freezer may have been opened, but the real story was just beginning. Jake stood on the hospital balcony, watching the sun rise slowly over the edge of the city skyline. The world looked quiet, calm even, but he knew better now. After everything that had happened, he couldn't look at silence the same way. Somewhere, behind the walls of clean offices and anonymous labs, there were still people like those behind Cryostar, hiding in plain sight, playing with time, with science, and with lives. Inside, Peter Kincaid was recovering steadily. Though frail, he was lucid now. His memory was patchy, but he remembered enough. He recalled volunteering for the trial, believing he'd wake up after just 3 months. He never imagined it would be 13 years. What hit him hardest wasn't the science. It was the world he had woken up in. Friends gone. Colleagues disappeared. And his work, twisted into something unrecognizable. Peter had spoken to the media once, a quiet and short interview arranged by Evelyn. He kept his words careful, not revealing too much, but enough to confirm that Cryostar had hidden something they never meant to be discovered. He didn't name names, but his message was clear. Some science should never leave the lab. Some boundaries exist for a reason. The full story made waves, but it wasn't the firestorm Jake expected. There was coverage, debate, and public outcry, but quickly, the news cycle moved on. That's how things go now. People scroll, react, and forget. But not everyone forgot. Whistleblower networks, independent scientists, and even ethics groups picked up the breadcrumbs Jake and Evelyn had left behind. Slowly, the world was beginning to question things more deeply, about how far science can go and who it should serve. Evelyn went back to her hometown for a while, helping Peter adjust and rebuild his life. She kept in touch with Jake, sending updates, and occasionally asking him if he ever heard more about Subject 01. Neither of them had. The envelope with the photo remained in Jake's drawer, untouched, a reminder that some answers were still out there, waiting. Jake tried to return to normal life, But normal had shifted. He left his old job, moved to a quieter part of the city, and started writing. At first, just for himself. Notes, thoughts, the things he couldn't say out loud. But eventually, he realized the story needed to live somewhere people could find it. Not the sensational parts. Not the viral version. The real version. The human one. About a man who opened a storage unit and found something that changed his life forever, not just because of what he saw, but because of what it made him understand. He wrote about how curiosity led him into a dark corner of forgotten science. About fear, how it nearly made him walk away. And about courage, the quiet kind, the kind that shows up when no one's watching. He wrote about Evelyn, about Peter, and about the people who tried to keep the truth buried. And most importantly, he wrote about how secrets can outlive the people who made them, waiting in freezers, files, and faded paper until someone is brave or foolish enough to lift the lid. The last part of the story came months later, in the form of a plain white envelope slipped under his door. No message, just a USB drive. Jake hesitated before plugging it in. When he did, a single file appeared, one more video. It was short, grainy, and clearly old. A static-filled clip of what looked like a CryoStar boardroom. A group of men and women in suits sat around a table, and at the front, a younger Peter Kincaid presented a concept: long-term human preservation for medical emergencies. He talked about freezing trauma patients until care was available, about using cryostasis in war zones, natural disasters, or during organ transport. His voice was full of hope. Then a voice from off-camera interrupted. What about elite preservation? Private contracts? Peter paused. That wasn't the intent. The voice came again, firmer. But is it possible? Peter didn't answer. The clip ended there. Jake sat still for a long time. That was the moment everything had shifted. Not when Peter entered the chamber, not when CryoStar shut down, not when Jake opened the unit, but when a good idea met the wrong audience. The lesson hit him like a cold wind. Sometimes the real danger isn't what we create, it's who gets to control it. As time passed, Jake found peace not in solving every mystery, but in accepting that he'd done what he could. He exposed the truth. He saved a life. And he gave others a reason to look a little closer, to ask the hard questions, even when the answers were uncomfortable. The story became more than just a mystery about a freezer in an abandoned storage unit. It became a warning, a reflection, and in some ways, a mirror. Because for every secret out there waiting to be discovered, there's a person who has to decide what to do when they uncover it. To turn away, or to speak up. And Jake had chosen to speak. He visited Evelyn and Peter one last time before the winter set in. Peter was walking now, slower than before, but with purpose. Evelyn had started documenting their story in a documentary, using Jake's notes and footage to tell it the way it deserved to be told. On his way back home, Jake passed by the storage facility where it all began. The unit had been emptied, cleaned out, and eventually rented to someone else. No one who walked past it would ever guess what it once held. Jake didn't go inside. He didn't need to. He already knew what he had found wasn't just frozen inside that box. It had been inside himself the whole time. A spark, a question, a choice. And in the end, that's what the story became. Not about cold machines or sealed chambers, but about what we do when the truth finally sees daylight. And who we become after we open the lid.